I'm Darien G. I'm here with Jeannie Ewing, and we are talking today about moms who write. It's not a hobby. We wanted to give sort of we want to open up a space for other writers to kind of hear how some writers, me and Jeannie, have tried to figure out writing while caregiving, writing while juggling multiple roles, lots of balls in the air, dropping a lot of balls, dropping a lot of plates, breaking those plates, but still, staying the course. And also, when you have people around you who kind of don't take you seriously because they're like, oh, that's just so cute that you write. And it's just like so aggravating where you're trying to carve that space out for yourself. So welcome. I'm Darien G from Writerish. And then Jeannie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie Ewing. I write I Grow Strong Again on Substack. And Derry and I have just kind of been chatting in DM about just different topics that surround writing. And this was just something that landed for both of us. So I just want to give you a brief interview or overview of who I am. And so I have 5 kids. My oldest is 15 almost, and she will be a freshman in high school this week. And then my youngest is 5, so he is actually going to be in kindergarten. So these are like two bookends that are big milestones. And then I have other kids in between. But mainly, I got into professional writing when my second child, Sarah, was born almost 13 years ago. And she was born with a rare genetic condition called Apert syndrome. And it just was something that I had to explain constantly, and I found myself repeating what her diagnosis was, what it meant, all the surgeries that she had to go through, because it is a rare condition. And so I had never heard of it. I was doing research, and it just became really exhausting to rehearse this same kind of narrative over and over. And one of my friends said,
Mm.
"Why don't you start a blog?" So I was like, sure, I'll do that. And it was really honestly with the intention of just talking about Sarah, kind of chronicling her story. And I found out that it was almost kind of like this outlet for me where I was able to reflect as a mom. Like, this is how this is affecting my life or affecting my worldview. And this is how I feel like myself
Yeah.
changing. And so that then became a gateway for me to start freelance writing. And I actually became a published Catholic author. So I have 7 books, and I worked for a lot of different periodicals where I was a syndicated columnist and became a national speaker on mostly on the topic of grief. So that's kind of just a brief synopsis of me and as a mom writer.
Yeah. And then for me, I live on the Big Island. My husband and I moved here about 25 years ago, and we have 3 kids. They were all born and raised here. And so for us, it's really been, we've always had the question of, where do we want to be? How is it that we're trying to raise our family? And that kind of was, I want to say, like a newer conversation because I've always known I was a writer and I was writing before we came here. I wasn't published. I was published in small things, but I didn't have a book or anything before we moved here. And my first book was my daughter was 4 when that book came out, almost 5 when that book was published. And it took my kids now are 24, 19 and 17. And I have 5 novels with Penguin Random House. I've got a poetry collection with Poetry Society of America. I have a bunch of creative nonfiction anthologies, and micro prose collections. And I'm currently working on a book for Bloomsbury, for their object lesson series. And, that means I still have 1 kid at home full time because he's in high school and they started today. Your kids start this week as well. So they're back in school, which is great and also not great because then we have timed responsibilities, right? That we have to sort of weave into everything. And then I have one in college who's coming back and forth quite a bit. And then I have one who's on the mainland because I'm in Hawaii, who, we're always trying to figure out how to make that work. And we have a time difference. There's just lots of things that make it a little bit more challenging, especially if anything urgent kind of comes up. So it's hard, I think, honestly, that sort of line that you walk when you have children, especially if you have young children, or if you are even caregiving let's say parents, or helping out with other family members. That's, we have a lot of multi-generation families in Hawaii. So I know that there are some people who, I recognize some names, who that's their reality too, and so it's always funny to me, Jeannie, because people are always like, I don't know how you do it. And I'm always like, I don't know how I do it either. Because it feels like a small miracle. And it is actually a small miracle. I think that's the thing to talk about too, right? That sometimes it is like a small miracle, sort of how these things get done, how we manage to not just stay creative, but also maybe push through for a deadline or trying to find an agent. I mean, I had my kids after I started getting my work into the world in a big way, which meant I was querying, I was doing all that stuff while trying to raise my children, and I was homeschooling, for the first, I don't remember if you homeschooled, but I homeschooled for 6 years for my oldest.
Same.
And it was just a different dynamic. Yeah, different timing, different dynamic.
Yeah, totally. That was same with me.
You were
Well,
you homeschooled your kids too, so you had them home with you for
I
some years?
schooled Felicity, my oldest, for
Mhm.
6.
Yeah, same, yeah,
It was partially because Sarah I was gone with her so much, and she had so many different diagnostic tests and procedures, and it just didn't make sense for me to put Felicity into a traditional school when our schedule as a family was so erratic. But I also found that that also made it easy for me to be a writer, to kind of fit,
yeah,
to sculpt, I wanna say, my life around my writing, or my writing around my life, I guess is a better way of saying it. Because, I could draft an article at night, when the kids went to bed. I could do it in a waiting room when I was, with Sarah in the little baby car seat carrier and she was napping, or there were just moments where I could just kind of capture. And I wanna say that that's something I've kind of continued as a habit, but something that really is offensive to me as a woman, as a mom, is when people assume that this is just some sort of like fun little avocation that,
right.
like, frivolous thing. It's not something I'm serious about, and I feel really hurt by that, and it also makes me think a lot about a lot of the misconceptions surrounding motherhood and
Yeah,
surrounding being an artist in general, and how most artists aren't taken seriously, and there are so many ideas floating around, or stereotypes that, the starving artist, which is kind of what I was told when I was growing up, and I
yeah,
said
same, mhm,
author, "Oh, you'll never make money doing." That was always the primary thing. And there was this one occasion where I was at a dinner party with my husband for his work. And my husband is a materials engineer, so he is like a hard science person. And what he does is very concrete and very tangible. And so it's very easy for him to have a conversation about what he does for a living. Well, we were at this gala, and it was employees and their spouses or partners, and everyone was kind of going around the table like you do, introducing yourself. What do you do? What do you do? And it comes to me, and I said, "Well, I'm a writer." And I got these polite smiles, dead
like, that's
silence,
so cute.
sipping their wine or their beer or their mixed cocktail, whatever, and then they just move on to something else. And it occurred to me that was really when it clicked with me, Darien, where I was like, "Oh, people don't think I'm a real writer. They think I'm just saying this." And I don't wanna say real writer because I know that's a big there's a lot of, there's just a lot around that surrounds there's a lot of emotion, a lot of
Exactly. Yeah,
so I get that because we can be writers when we say we are. And sometimes
yeah,
I think the thought of "I am a writer" has to come before the rest of it comes, whatever that might look like for each individual. So that's a digression, but what I'm saying is I realized in the moment at this dinner party, okay, so people think I'm one of those who just says I'm doing something, but I'm not doing it, and I wanted to say more, but I didn't. And I've noticed since that time, so this was maybe 10 years ago, that people are either not interested, so they generally just don't care that I write, or they don't know what to say. There's this very awkward, uncomfortable pause that happens when I say I'm a writer, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, that's cool. What do you write?" And if I offer more information, which I don't write about grief primarily anymore. I've switched into more mainstream writing, which is what I do on Substack, and also I've been working on my first memoir. But I'll tell them about my previous publishing history, and it's almost like they're totally taken aback, completely surprised. "Really? Oh, you have published books."
Oh, right.
And
Like, that's okay now, right?
right, and it makes me feel like, what is this message conveying to the rest of writers who haven't necessarily reached their publishing goals? It just reinforces this stereotype that you can't really call yourself a writer until you have that credential or that tangible thing to back it up, like a book or a brand or something.
But I think even if you do, I mean, now I have publication credits for now I have books, but even now, I still get those looks, and then that whole judgment like, "Oh, well, would I have read anything that you wrote?" And I always say maybe, but inside I'm like, "No." I mean, it's so unlikely, right? And and I just as somebody who's been on sort of both sides of that conversation, right, of the telling people that I'm a writer before I had anything that I could point to as quote unquote evidence, and now having quote unquote evidence, but then feeling like I don't feel like I want to or need to prove to you that I've done this. And then, of course, you're only as good as your last spoken there. So they're like, well, what are you working on now? And oh, well, what else? What else do you do? And then, of course, the let me tell you about all the writers I know. And so there's just this way of, like you said, kind of like passing around the real topic of either who you are or how you're creative. And what also gets to me is how, sometimes this happens in my case too. I mean, I have really great family actually, but extended families, like if we do a bigger reunion and there are people maybe I don't know or they don't keep up with me and they're not as aware of what I'm doing, and they asked me that question, I really actually don't care about people at a dinner party anymore. I'm just, I'm 57, I'm over it. We were talking about age and how this also impacts both your energy level and also like kind of what you care about in terms of you have to, and I think you've noticed this, we always have to focus. We have to choose what we focus on. But what I don't like about the more sort of intimate um environment in which this conversation comes up is my kids are sometimes there, right? My kids are sometimes there because it's a family thing. And now they're getting some societal message that, oh, it's not really okay. Or my mom's sort of the oddball, or you have to justify or explain yourself. And so I'm very, I've moved to a point where, because I also don't want to feel like I have to educate people. And yet at the same time, I also don't want to kind of be like, this isn't what I do,
Right.
you
Right.
know? Yeah. I thought also it would be really interesting for us to kind of pivot for anyone who's sort of just joining us. Jeannie Ewing and I are here talking about what it's like to be working parents, working writers who are also actively parenting children. And also, but it applies to any kind of caregiving you do. In other words, if you have responsibilities to someone other than yourself and maybe your spouse, in which the timetable is not up to you, right? Because the calls come. I mean, it's like, and also that's the other thing too, is right. And I know that this is the pro and con of our schedules. Like you said, there's flexibility, but the con is there's flexibility, right? Which means that as much as I can be available when the school calls and says Luke has a fever, and now I've got to drive an hour to get to a school and then pick him up and then try to get him to the doctor. I can move things around, but at the same time, it's not just circumstances that will kind of come in. I kind of forget sometimes to honor where I'm trying to create something or work something, and I treat my time as a little bit flexible. In other words, I'll be like, "Oh, I could do that later. I better go, whatever, do the dishes first, do the laundry first. It's driving me crazy. I got to do this and that." And I've had to work, and I still continue to do this even after all of these years of writing and having really slow periods where I can't seem to make anything happen, and I'm just like, "It's over, it's done." I had my one moment and it's over, and you're just sitting there and you're feeling already so alone because, I have to bring myself back to that place where I'm staying flexible, but also having a certain layer of discipline. And I know that, you've mentioned it already, but we can talk about a little bit more about how you layer in some structure to the best of our ability, because I have some thoughts on that too. But how you layer in some structure so that we can not only write and do the thing that we wanna do, but also how we continue to kind of, keep our confidence up, keep our clarity up. What are
Well,
some
that's
things that you do that seem to work? Yeah.
and for me, the confidence and clarity portion, Darien, are separate from the organization and time management. I'm exceptionally good at the latter and not so great at the former. So I'll talk about the time management portion first. But for me, it's a lot like what you said in the very beginning when you said people are like, I don't know how you do it all. And that's kind of become a cliche to me. And I kind of feel like, oh, here we go again. But when I think about it, it's like, well, how do I do it all? I don't do everything. I am very selective what I do, and I have to make sure that I'm intentional every day. But what helps me is that I have an editorial calendar and I just make columns based on key messages or themes that I write about on my Substack, or that I just want to write about for maybe an essay I want to pitch to get published somewhere in a lit mag. And I have it by week, week 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5. And then I have a schedule, a publication date of every Wednesday for Substack. And then I just write little notes in each month for that day. And so if I get stuck or if I feel overwhelmed and I'm not sure what I want to write about or I forget, I just look at my little editorial calendar I print out every fall or right before the holidays so that I have it ready to go in January. I also know that based on my kids' schedules for school or any kind of family events or something, that I have to plan around those things. So I tend to work ahead. So, for example, I was really scrambling in May to make sure I polished up my Substack essays for June, July, and August because I knew I wasn't going to have time with all 5 kids home. Plus, I cram a lot of my daughter Sarah's appointments in the summer when I have to drive a long distance. You're talking about when your son has a fever and you have to drive an hour. 100% get that, and I know that about my life and about our family's
Yeah.
rhythm. And so I have to make sure that I consider that when I'm looking ahead. And at the same time, this kind of goes into the, I guess, maybe psychological or emotional self portion. I also have to consider my needs and if I need a break or
Yes. Yep.
to something non-writing related. And so for me, I just kind of have understood over time the rhythms that work for me creatively and how that just happens in spontaneous moments, how that also happens in disciplined moments. And I try my best to just stay tuned in or attuned to when I know creative inspiration is tapping me on the shoulder. I just know that feeling and I know that nudge. And so I make sure that
Mhm.
I carry a notebook with me everywhere I go, or I have my app, my notes app on my phone and I just jot down phrases or maybe a short conversation and oftentimes those are what I shape my stories around and sometimes even bigger essays or poetry. And I guess when people say how do you do all that? How do you juggle it? It's like, well, I think that when you're a creative person and you have a super busy life, it's very full and you're trying to manage lots of people's schedules and just like you said Darian, when you're caring for anybody other than yourself or in addition to yourself, it to me, it sounds like we know that we have limited time, and
Yeah.
because we don't have these long stretches of time to just do whatever we want and fill it up with daydreaming, we actually have to be really, really deliberate in how we structure our time. And so that's what I do. I also do office hours. So when my kids are at school, I have a set time every day that I just am at my desk and I use it to write a draft, revise, pitch, do research, work on my query, work on my book proposal. And when it comes to longer form projects like books, um, you know, that's where I know that I'm going to need to take more time in terms of, like, consolidated time. So it's not like I have 20 minutes and then a break, but I'm gonna need an hour or 2 in order for me to get really deep into that concept or idea that I'm trying to flesh out in a longer form, written form. So that's what I do in a nutshell to kind of manage my time and carve it around my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think so much of what you said, really resonates, and I know that unfortunately, um, I create a lot of structures for myself. I coach a lot of people on how to create structures for themselves, but my reality is that I just I can't always abide by the structure that I create, even for myself. And I do want to mention that because I really want people to not beat themselves up when they aren't able to, stick with the schedule, quote unquote. The one thing it does help, as you said, to know your why. It helps to know what it is that's important to you with your writing because we can't do everything. If you're someone like me and you're like, you have like a zillion ideas and there's so many things you want to write about, but you only have so much time. Plus, and I know this sounds really negative, but sometimes I'm just, I I sometimes expect like the other shoe to drop. So I'm always kind of working in a slightly not anxious state, but I'm very clear like this is the time I have right now to do this. I may not have this time later today. So I actually am always better off if I try to write earlier rather than later because really my days just stuff will happen, right? Because I live on the Big Islands, which is an outer island in Hawaii. And we just have regular daily stuff that happens, right? Like with the wind and the electricity and then the timing's all off. Somebody that you scheduled to come in and help take care of something didn't come last week, but they show up on your doorstep at some random time at like, and you're like, okay. And that's just so always having that going on with the kids and and then I got to go shopping. I mean, it's like, I still do like you, I still also do the meals. I also do the cooking. I also do, all the driving around. I also do the house cleaning. I do all that stuff in addition to all my stuff and everything else. And oh yes, as some people are saying here, yeah, and we have all these like, of course, we've had a lot of natural disasters. A lot of people have. We're now our adrenals are like another also in that kind of space of being always ready. And so because I know that I'm actually not good when I'm not writing. Like, okay, a few days can go by. Maybe I have to focus on family or myself and I'm not writing, but I can't go too long like that without going sideways. Like writing is such an important part of, I think, who I am, regardless of what I'm writing. Even if I'm just journaling, even if I'm working on a small project or no project, but I'm writing, right? Trying to see what's there, what wants to be known. If I don't do some of that, I become pretty unbearable in terms of someone to live. And then I also get resentful. And I think that's sort of the catch-22 with this, right? I've never pretended to be a parent who's like, oh my God, it's so awesome that I parent and I write, which by the way, it is awesome that I parent and I write. But it's also like, shit, I parent and I write, and and for any of you too, who, are caregiving just other people other than yourself and maybe your partner, it's a lot, because you have these other humans that you are also trying to care for and be attuned to. And you really may be the only person who can do what it is that you do. So, how you manage all of that is really tricky. And so I'll be honest, like I said, for myself, I know myself well enough that the day will get away from me. So if I don't try to do what I need to do earlier rather than later, it's up for grabs. My time will be up for grabs. Um, I do I am a pantser versus a plotter, meaning that I kind of go by the seat of my pants. And it's not just the way I write, it is also the way I create, which means that I know what I need to get done. And sometimes I'll spell it out and sometimes I won't. And sometimes if I spell it out, I hit that criteria and sometimes I don't. And I try to, I don't beat myself up for it too much. I still do. I know better. But I try not to beat myself for it too much because I also trust how all of this unfolds. And I will also say, as a final corollary, that having the family, which when I think I was really trying to get a lot of books out earlier, was really, I just wasn't getting enough sleep on top of all that and taking care of the kids, young kids. And I was nursing and writing and revising and trying to make my deadlines. And I had a little bit of resentment then. And, where I am now is I feel like not only has that time pressure and the demand for me to prioritize myself, because you only have so much time. What that's done is it's actually probably made me a better writer,
Yes. Yeah.
because I had the family. Yeah, versus because there are times where I'm like, well, if it was just me, I'd probably get so much done and everything. And this is not to say that I don't want my family. It's just, but I think that if you're a writer and if you've always wanted to write, right, that's always for me the thought that comes in. It's kind of like, wow, and I see, other folks who are really producing, and I'm like, wow, if that was. But I also know myself well enough to know that my family forces me in a different way to one really decide what's important, and also all these like on the topic of miracles, all these unexpected things have come up as a result of the fact that I have to juggle both.
Yes, 100%. I'm glad that you mentioned, giving ourselves grace and not feeling like we have to be confined to our schedules because I've that's something I've had to learn. I'm very much a planner, and having a child with a medical condition that
Mm.
there are new things that happen all the time. I've had to learn how to be that way both in my professional life and also my personal life. And another thing, I think there's a big overlap, at least for me, with personal growth and professional growth. And you kind of touched on that, Darian.
Yes.
You were mentioning those of us, I would even maybe even, I'm going to just say all of us are probably hypervigilant. Most of us are in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn stage a lot or constantly.
I agree.
And we've got a lot of collective trauma going on. And, we really have to, each one of us has to decide and discern how we're going to manage our nervous systems in a way that we can learn how to self regulate. We can learn how to be calm, what is nurturing for each
Yes, 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 yes.
person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my personal healing from
Mhm.
my complex trauma has been a parallel journey with my writing. And so when you were saying you really feel like you're just not the best version of yourself when you're not writing, if so many days goes by or so much time lapses that you just feel yourself feeling resentful and crabby, 100%. I get that. And that's another reason I knew that this was something that was just really enmeshed in the fabric of who I am. Because even when I'm not writing for publication, I am still processing my thoughts, my
Yep.
feelings, ideas, and sometimes just playing. Like uh process journaling or exploratory journaling is huge for me. And it's also because I have a background in psychology and counseling. And so I understand the importance and the value of finding clarity through writing. And also
Yeah.
just this consciousness kind of, okay, I'm not doing this for any sort of grammar or punctuation or spelling. I'm not censoring what I'm writing. It's kind of just vomit writing. It's getting all the garbage out. I can give myself permission to write
Mhm.
garbage. And so because I'm doing that and I also know that it's keeping me in the practice of writing, I also recognize that there may be some sort of seed that is nestled inside of that garbage
Yeah.
that might become fodder, or germinate, to use that same metaphor, over time into something that actually will have universal application. And that happens a lot for me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it really is, at least for me, it's really a big deal for me to take care of myself because I know that when I'm not attending to my big feelings or my overwhelm or being on the verge of burnout or whatever the case may be, I also know that that's going to affect everything in my life, not just my writing, but definitely that. It's going to affect the way that I show up in the world. And a big
Mhm.
part of why I write publicly is because I really want to bring back this idea that as humans, we need to recognize the humanity in each other because we've strayed so far from that in the political arguments that we have and all of the containers that we like to label and box people into. And I like to try to challenge those boxes with what I write. And
Yep.
so I knew that if I'm going to show up as that person, to be to show up in a way where I can be the best version of myself that day in that moment, then I know that I need to be stepping away sometimes. And sometimes I need to just say, okay, I didn't reach this goal today. That's all right. But I also do know that there is this kind of dance for me between discipline and spontaneity. And I kind of just over time have figured out what that looks like for me. But I think it's different for everyone.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's just I think, for me, I've had to constantly pivot and sort of readjust my expectations, and it's become easier to adjust those expectations because I actually trust how things unfold more than I did before. I think before it was more of an intellectual trust, like, I know these things happen for a reason, which, sorry, for those of you who don't believe that, I am one of those people who believes that things happen for a reason. We just may not always know what those reasons are. But because of that, but I've seen it. I think many of you have too. If you're creative, you've seen it where you're like, whoa, that's interesting. Like, that's a coincidence, is it? But, I see a lot of that. I have a lot of those synchronicities. And I find the more we're sort of tapped in, the more clarity we have about sort of what we want and who we are, why we write, where we are in relationship to our maybe familial commitments, we get different kinds of support coming in from whatever belief system you have, but I see that happening in my life. And, I do try to add, like I say, some structure to it, but I also know that just the way I operate, that I sometimes have to let that structure go. What I do though on the self-care side is that, I am early to bed and I am early to rise. And Ariel, and I'm just going to look at the chat because we have a few questions here. Says, when you say you write early in the day, can you give us a time frame? It's not all the time. I just know that if I go past 12 o'clock, I may get some writing done. I may not get some writing done. And of course, the kids are coming home at that point. And then I got to get dinner ready, and I probably haven't shopped, so I got to run to the store. So all that's happening. But for me, I try to be in bed between 9 o'clock and by 10, I'm in bed, like, lights out. I might be reading or something, but I try to not do any of that stuff, and it's hard, because I can totally get sucked in with my blue light, and I wanna see more and read more, and then I'm up too late. So I really try not to go past sort of that 9:30, 10 o'clock, because I will pay for it. And then I'm up at about between 4:45 and 5, and I wanna say that I'm actually not an early bird. My husband's an early bird. I've never been an early bird. I've always been a late night person. And I think this is another example of how, if you do have commitments to children or parents, if you're caregiving parents, or just other family members, that your schedule is not always your own. The truth is, even if we feel kind of resentful that we don't have our schedule as open as maybe some other people do who don't have the same commitments, it is actually a blessing that we can be fluid around this. And so it's like, let's just roll with it. Let's be fluid with it. So, for me, when I'm alone, like if I'm traveling or if my husband's gone, something like that, I kind of start to edge back to my old overnight stay up all late thing, but I pay for it later because I do still have kids. We still have to have, get out the door at a certain time or do whatever. And so I try to take care of myself by not throwing myself under the bus, which means I have to get enough sleep, especially because I'm menopausal. Jeannie, I talked about this as well. I'm an oversharer. So for those of you who haven't worked with me or you don't know me very well, be prepared. But because I'm going through the menopause thing, I'm also going through, because I'm late to menopause. So I'm 57, having all sorts of fun with that. And then, and like when we joke, like, oh, I have to take a nap every day. I'm like, "Yeah, no, I actually really have to take a nap every day." It's like I mean, part of it's probably me because I'm up so early, but part of it's too is because I think our adrenals are on that standby mode, and we are a little bit shut off, and we have to just make sure that we're checking in and replenishing so I don't go down. Because if I go down, everything goes down. My writing goes down, my family goes, it's not pretty. And we've gone down a few times. So I say I'm speaking from experience. This is not a theoretical. If we were to go down, we've gone down, and it's not great. So the other thing I try to do, because my doctor is like, you need to start doing this for other health issues that I have, that are family stuff, is that I try to walk in the morning. I know a lot of you are maybe already be active. I'm not actually active. I actually kind of don't like to be active. I'm very happy sitting at my desk. And I will stand sometimes, but actually I like to sit at my desk. But it's caught up with me. And so what I'll do is my routine now is to get out of bed. I do my walk because it also gets so hot in Hawaii here. Try to get my walk done. I just move for 30 minutes. I try to move as fast as I can, sometimes maybe not. And then I come back and then I try to get some writing done before the whole house is in motion. Then if I don't have any appointments, I'll try to write after that. I mean, that's just really how it goes. But honestly, I have a lot of appointments. So I have a lot of things going on. So, and I can't, it's harder for me to write in 20 minutes. I can't do small bits like that. But in 20 minutes, I can maybe do Substack. In 20 minutes, I can maybe look at my work or my calendar. The one thing I tell all the writers I work with is that if you have a project that's like in play right now that you're working on, to always put your hands on the project every day, even if you aren't actively writing or revising. In other words, that you keep a printout of what you're working on. And you literally, it's like the laying on of hands. You're laying your hands and touching this manuscript and being like, okay, this is where I am. And you can do that in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and it will change you because you're not going to forget and you're going to see it and it's going to remind you. So those are just some of the things that I do too that really help me move forward because I still want to do so much as a writer, Jeannie. It's like I do a lot of, I do journals, so I do a lot of that as well, but I still want to keep getting my work out in the world, and I can't do that if I'm not writing.
I really love how you went back to, like, these basic things that we tend to forget or neglect And it does really come back to sleep, and it comes back to our level of activity. And your routine that you described is very similar to mine. So, but I actually am naturally a morning person. So my circadian rhythm will get me up like at 5:30 or 6 every day. And when I'm up, that from that moment until about noon or 1 o'clock, I can work a lot very efficiently, and I'm very alert, and I have a lot of ideas swimming around in my head, and I find that I'm very productive. So I do the same kind of thing. I make sure that after my kids go to school is when I do my workout. I take a walk outside in nature with my dog. That's huge for me because I really love being with the trees and the wildlife in my area. I find a lot of inspiration from nature. It's very grounding for me. And also, just getting the fresh air and the sunshine. And then I come back and I feel like I just have this clarity. My head's been cleared after I've done some process journaling. Then I can sit down and I can actually tackle whatever project, or there are various projects, like you were saying. I have a
Sure.
lot of different projects in different stages of development. And I have to decide based on my list, like, how am I going to prioritize this today? What came up unexpectedly? And also, I think too, Darian, for me, it's a lot of this juggling between professional and personal life as a mom, writer, is that I have to really deal with disappointment because
Oh, that's a good point.
sometimes I think that
Mhm.
I'm going to reach this goal and it seems very, very realistic and feasible. And I'm on track for that. And I get derailed because there is
Yep.
some sort of family crisis or something that comes up unexpectedly. And that's very common with the condition that my
Mhm.
Sarah has. So, again, to me, it goes back to that doing that inner work, that
Yep.
psychological and emotional work for me, where I'm able to have these outlets, which therapy is one for me, and also hormone therapy. You're talking about menopause. So, and I love the fact that you overshare. I know you're kind of apologizing, for that, but I want to just digress for a minute and say that is one thing that we all love about you. I mean, those of us,
Yeah, really. No filter.
it just shows how this is real. This is real life. And you're willing to just like say the things that many of us don't or can't or don't know how. And so that's really valuable, Darian. It's huge. And a lot of us women can relate to that. So these are all complex factors that really play into how does this work and how do we figure this out? And I don't think that there's really any one sort of like panacea that we can apply to every person. But I think that it's important to have these conversations because, going back to the beginning of our talk where you were mentioning all the different things that you do and that you juggle domestically, like all of the care work and all of the mental and invisible and domestic labor, I do that stuff too. And let's just be honest, that same expectation is never placed on the men.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
you
Mhm.
know, it all goes into what do we have in terms of the expectations placed upon us, whether spoken or not. And what do we do with that? And how do we manage that and handle it? And so I have to go back a lot and just get out a lot of my pent up feelings because I do deal with a lot of frustration, a lot of disappointment, a lot of discouragement. There have been moments recently where I'll wake up at maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, not because I'm gonna get up, but because my body wakes me up and I just start crying because I think, gosh, there are all these things that I wanna
Yeah.
do before I die, and I have to just face the fact that I'm not gonna be able to do them all. I can't. So it to me, a lot of this it goes back to this recognition of my own mortality, my own limitations, but also kind of like what you alluded to, this aspect of a divine hand that is
Mhm.
operating, orchestrating in some way, whether we want to call it synchronicity or we want to call it providence or, coincidence or whatever we want to call it. There is something to that. And I believe in that. And I've seen it happen. I've seen ways that when I have an open mind and an open heart, and I can just go about my day as it's planned, there are so many unexpected things that happen where I realize, wow, I did not know that this conversation was going to be so impactful for this person or for me. And then I can go home and I reflect about it. And then a lot of times it becomes an essay or some sort of story that I'm going to share. But before you whatever you want to comment, I wanna say that your micro essay, um, format for
Mhm.
how to do it has been really beneficial for me in recent months because
Thanks. Yeah.
found that this summer, I don't have a lot of extra time where I don't have like an hour or 2 hours consecutively to do my work first thing in the morning. But what I do have is 10 minutes. So, going back to this process that you shared in your UCLA extension course that I took has been confidence building. So when you were kind of
Oh,
talking
good.
piece of
Yeah.
it's one of
Yeah.
those I'm like, "Oh, I can write about this and I can do it in 10 minutes and it's actually decent
Yeah.
and I can do it again." And so I think
Right.
that there are these ways that we can find snapshots and snippets, and yet those can be actually very fruitful if we know how to polish it and how to refine it in a way that doesn't have to be this long, drawn out, detailed description, but really gets to the heart of what we want to say. And so you've helped me with your teaching on.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. I think that's one reason why I love microprose because, which I define as 300 words or less, not including the title. My like little pitch there for it. But what I do love about it is that if it is a tool that you end up adding to your writer's toolkit, you can get something done in 10 minutes. And I'm not talking about necessarily, I mean, it can be for a larger project, but I usually am helping people tell a story in 10 minutes or under 300 words. And that very finite sort of container means that if you really don't have a lot of time, you can trust that some writing is going to get done. And it's a really not just powerful feeling, but you will actually get some writing done. And that writing, the more you do this, it's like any kind of training that we do, creates opportunities for you as a writer. There's places that some of these pieces can go for you, either individually or part of a larger collection. So I am really excited about that as a way to just remind writers that yes, it's about one, a writing practice, but two, also really honoring that what kind of shows up, because a lot of what I teach is also prompt based, right? But that whatever shows up is somehow purposeful, even if you don't understand it just yet. And that kind of brings me back to something that I wanted to circle back around to what you said earlier. And I think Kit had a question here about derailment or being derailed. And I will say that the way I look at things now, I mean, I hope I have, of course, many more years of writing ahead of me still, but I do feel like I've had quite a few tucked under my belt at this point. And I might feel like things are derailed, but I actually know, I deeply know that things aren't derailed, that that's just the way this was going to go. It doesn't mean that I sit there and go, oh, well, that's the way it's going to go. So much for that. I sit there and I actually try to find sort of a deeper connection for myself about, okay, I'm really disappointed that did not go the way I thought. And I do kind of ask the question, well, what does that mean? Where am I now? What am I going to do next? Like, I feel like one thing I always tell writers is that your real job actually is to pay attention. I know I'm not the only writer that says this, but it really is to pay attention. And it's not just to what's happening in the world around you. 100% absolutely, because our lens is what makes us so unique when we get those observations, those stories down, but also paying attention to yourself. How are you feeling about it? What's your response to what's going on, to your own life, right? It's like, sometimes being a writer is actually a safe way of actually not feeling the feels. Even when you're rewriting it, people are like, oh, I feel like I might be re traumatizing myself with this moment. But there's a distance with writing, which is both good and bad. And I think the challenge for us as writers is to sometimes get out of our head, get back into our deeper bodies, which is why movement is such an important thing and has been very helpful for me too, for that reason. And just be and ask yourself, wow, that did not go as I thought, and I'm really disappointed or I'm sad or I'm upset or I'm angry. And then I know this sounds like therapy because it is. I mean, it's all the same thing. I mean, I'm like, people are like, how long have you been in therapy? I'm like, oh, forever. How long are you going to be in? And my kids are like, well, it doesn't seem to be working. And I'm like, it's working just fine. Welcome to real life, my friend. I mean, I just my kids and I talk about this all the time. And I'm like, for me, the way I use therapy and work with therapy is it's another opportunity for me to have another lens to my own life. And then I get to decide again, how do I feel about it? How do I not feel about it? Right. And that's really, I feel like our work as writers is that interpretation of the world and of ourselves. And then of course our ability to get it and pin it to the page somehow.
Well, and also I think that there's something to be said about being close to what you're living and what you're experiencing, which to me, that that raw writing is something that I give myself permission to do in my private journal,
Absolutely. Mhm.
right? And then with time and some distance, I'm better able to see how to shape something that I've written in a way that others can read, that can be published. And that, of course, that doesn't always happen with everything that I write, but I do think that there is something to be said for that inner work that we keep going back to, what you said, Darian, about paying attention to ourselves. I know that for me, when 2020 hit and I had my fifth baby the day before the world shut down,
Wow.
and I had to cancel my house cleaner, my babysitter, my parents couldn't come and help me, obviously, right? I was passively suicidal, and that was a catalyst for me. I also lost all of my speaking engagements that were lined up that year. And it was also a huge pivot for me when you're talking about pivoting, because that's when I decided to walk away from religious writing and rebuild, which has taken me a very long time to rebuild my writing career. But the first thing that I did was I had to start paying attention to myself because I'd
Mhm.
for so long, and I'd gotten to that place in my life where I wanted to give up. I couldn't see the things that you're talking about, whether it was, okay, I'm disappointed about this, but this is exactly the way that it's unfolding. And there's something in this that that's meant for me, right? Everything in my life has panned out the way that it's meant to pan out. And I couldn't see that. I didn't believe it. And so there was this just kind of this clawing my way out of this hole, that therapy was one of those tools. And also, I really do believe writing, I know this sounds cliched, but writing really saved me in that sense that I knew I could go to the blank page every day and I knew I could write whatever I wanted to, whatever I needed to. And I was just getting it out of myself. It was just coming out. It was pouring out of me. And it was safe there. Where there was no other human in my immediate life. I don't have family support with the work that I do. I do not have people in my life, in my real life, who support anything that I do with my writing. So I didn't really have that support in my personal life at the time either. And struggling as a mom of five 5 years ago with a newborn, and a special needs child, right? I was like, is this my destiny? Is this what I'm supposed to do? And I'm never going to be able to find a way out of it. And so when I was able to go to my journals, it was almost like, okay, here's something that's non-judgmental. It's something that's waiting for me as long as I need to take, or I can just verbally ventilate without someone stopping me and telling me that I'm talking too much, or I don't have to feel like I'm gonna be misunderstood. And that's not something that I was receiving from a human at the time. And so in that way, writing as process really gave me this power. It was empowering to me. It was something where I realized that I
Yep.
still have a voice and that I could
Mhm.
use it. And then I also realized, because I was a seasoned writer when this happened to me, that I had a responsibility to find a way to use my voice constructively in a way that would be helpful to others, not just like, oh, I'm just gonna, let my dirty laundry hang out and just vent to the world, but really in a way that, how is my story going to help other people? How is this part of my life going to help other people? But that doesn't happen until we learn that practice of paying attention to ourselves, to our feelings, our reactions, our thoughts. And I think that if we did that more frequently, and we created this habit of doing that, I do think we would have less reactionary problems that come up, whether it's in these digital spaces where we see a lot of, the vitriolic arguments that happen online.
Mhm.
Also think that we would see it more in our neighborhoods and our communities, where people actually return to a civilized way of interacting with each other, maybe even kind. So, these are all things that really come back to me about, how am I paying attention both to my internal world and my external world? And how do both of those things coalesce into what stories want to be told through me? What is working, create or churning creatively in my life right now? And how can I honor that?
Yeah. No, I love that. I think I love that we're so on the same page with so much of, I think, what we, have are going through and what we feel like is, not a way out because we're always in it. There's no getting through a tunnel. This is the tunnel. The tunnel is the world. It's our life in terms of writing. I know for myself, I also I do feel like that. I will say that I've always, even when I've been really disappointed, I have always kind of felt like I just need to figure out what this is. Like, not me figured out, but I just got to either be patient, or I have to listen or pay attention. And that has helped me because it's let me stay curious about what's going on. Like, I thought I had this nailed down. Like, I thought this was the sure thing, and clearly it's not. So what the hell does that mean? And instead of being like, what the hell does that mean? Which is usually my first response. My second response is more of a, what does that mean? What the hell does that mean? Like, I'm really now curious. Like, okay, so what else is going to happen? Is anything going to happen? And I do think too that I will say that, like, my goals at 45, 47, 55, 57 are very different now, than when, they just keep changing. And I've been able to actually let some more things go. And I've also, and it may have taken me longer than most people, but I've also been able to really get clear, and mostly because, tired, need those naps, to say that this is what I have room for. I have room for, myself and my own, like, self-care. My health is kind of an issue with something, so I have to, like, be on it. The second thing is, my family, and the third thing is my writing, not necessarily in that order. I've definitely put, honestly, my writing in front of my family before, not always with great results, sometimes with just fine results. Nobody's fallen apart. I mean, maybe they fell apart, but they're still all here, and it's okay. So sometimes, it's the order gets all mixed up, but those are the three things, which means that, and I know if you're a woman, especially, you've heard this before, which means that you have to be, I think, really rabid about your time and your bandwidth because, you know, if I have any free time, I either really need to be napping, or I need to be writing, or I need to be with my family, right? And so that means that, it does mean you really do have to say no to the other things, or reduce the amount of other things so that it's not competing with the things that really mean the most. Because I do look ahead and I do think, where do I want to be in 5 or 10 years? And before, it used to be very ambitious, right? It was very writing related, very success kind of oriented. And now it's just kind of like happy family home. I mean, it's all these things that really, it's just where I am now in my life, where I'm like, this is really important to me. So it means that other things that I actually even might love to do, I just only have so many available hours in the day. And because I have to get to bed. Like, someone's like, "Can we talk tonight?" I'm like, unless they're in crisis or in need, I'm like, "Can we talk tomorrow?" And I try to keep the phone, and I try to do all these things that take a while to, honestly, to shift those habits, because I've had those kind of bad habits for a long time about my own time, saying yes a lot,
Yeah.
overusing my device, all that kind of stuff. And I pay for that. I pay for that. And my family will pay for that. And my writing will pay for that. So I try to circle the wagons now, a little bit more intentionally with my writing, my self-care, and my family, because those are sort of the three things. And then everything else is gravy if I can pull it off. And sometimes I can't. But if I can't, it's not because I did things out of order. And the other thing too is, if you do things out of order, we roll with it. If you're a caregiver, that's how this goes. You just cannot plan some of these things. And so, you know, I I believe we can use everything that happens to us. I don't think you need to, though. And I think that even if something amazing or difficult has happened, it's up to you if you want to write about it. But you can use it all in terms of your own self growth, your own self awareness. And I feel like that's really the reason that we're here, right? Is to really understand that the sort of deeper elements of ourselves.
Yes, you're right. Well, that one final thing I wanted to say before we wrap up, because I'm looking at the time, is
Mhm.
that when you were talking about how your priorities have shifted, and they used to, when you were younger, they used to be more ambitious, and now they're more family oriented. Having my daughter Sarah really did that for me. And I still find myself wrestling with this ambition, because I think that that's just part of my personality. Um, but I
Yeah.
also feel like my children, if I didn't have them and I didn't have them present in my life every day to remind me of seeing the world through a child's eyes, which might sound, again, cliched, but it really does work for me.
Mhm.
th- I don't think that I would be the writer that I am. I don't think that I would
Yeah.
be able
100%.
to tell the stories that I tell. But I also really like, Darian, how you were telling everybody that we don't have to share all of our stories. Like, that's a very personal choice, and not
Yeah.
all of it meant to bare our souls and tell it all. You know, everyone is able to, we all have the right to decide what we want to share, how and when. And
Absolutely. Mhm.
that some people, when they read the things that I write, because I do write in a more confessional style, a lot of times people who read my work will say, "Oh, I could never do that." And my response is usually like, "Well, you don't have to." You know, I don't do it because I'm trying to get a reaction or a response or I think that it's sensational. I do it because I genuinely see that being honest in this and very directly honest is the way that I'm able to reach the people who need whatever it is that I'm telling and the story that I'm telling. So I really value the fact that you brought up all of those things because there is some wisdom in getting older and there is some wisdom in recognizing where we've been and where we're headed and being able to say that there's mystery to all of this and that we can be open and we can be curious, that we don't have to have these answers and we don't have to fit in all of these containers, but that we can just say to ourselves, all right, being curious about the process and about me, who I am as a human and my personal growth and what that looks for me in my writing life is a beautiful gift. And like you said, it's a blessing. So thanks, Darian, for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We really appreciate Gina. I really appreciate you all just joining us today and being a part of this conversation and asking those questions. And I will go ahead and put up the replay a little bit later today. So if you didn't catch all of our conversation, I'll have a little recap in there. And then if you have other thoughts or questions, you're welcome to drop them in the comments of the post. But thank you all. I'll let you kind of get on with the rest of your day. But Jeannie, always so nice to chat with you and to, be co-inspired by everything that you have going on. So thanks for your presence on Substack too, because I feel like it's just such a loving, open-hearted presence. And I think we all need that and we need more of that. So I'm glad that we connected this way.
Well, it's good to be there with you.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Have a really great day. You're all doing great. Just keep on keeping on, but you're doing great. Take care. Bye.